Hi Heather. So what we're going to do now is, I had the pleasure of first meeting Larry, I want to say about 10 years ago, was it Larry? And Larry was, we met at a coffee shop over on Plymouth Road, and Larry was just getting going on this, this business called ForeSee. And he and I talked, and he explained his vision of what he wanted to do over the next 5 years. And many of you have visions, and Zingerman's, which is one of our other sponsors, and I'm very happy to have Zingerman's as a sponsor, is very big on teaching visioning and envisioning what you want your business to be 5, 10 years out. And Larry actually was very focused on that vision and had a very clear idea of what he had hoped to develop. And I have to say, he was successful. He's been successful. He's one of the great stories of startups in Ann Arbor. ForeSee grew from a few people to how many employees did you have at the end, Larry?
We had about 340.
340. And you started with what? Me, Larry, okay. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the story of that enterprise. And Larry has also put some of these ideas into a book, which I have to say has one of the sexiest titles I've ever read. I get up every morning, just say that over and over again to inspire myself. But if there's anybody out there that writes titles for books, you might help Larry on his next one, because I think it's a great book, but it doesn't exactly like draw you in right away. You know, it's like, so we're gonna work on that. Maybe we'll give you some ideas. But Larry's a great success story, a great guy. And he comes to Ann Arbor every day from his home in Oakland County to work here, and he's now got a new enterprise, which is a consulting company for second stage startups. So Larry, come on up, and let's give Larry a great hand for creating jobs, creating success.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. You guys were listening, that's good. Well, it's definitely a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk about 3 different things. Okay. The first is really going to be about a little bit of the history of ForeSee, how I got to where we are today, which is no longer there. They called it an exit for a reason, because you leave, but it's a good thing. And then tell you a little bit about Innovating Analytics and the concepts behind it, and then tell you a little bit about what's next, and we're still figuring that out. Oh, and there's books. I'm more than willing to sign them if anybody wants that. So, you know, when you start a business, it's definitely not a straight path. It's not a highway. You know, it's the song, A Long and Winding Road, and I will not sing, so you're safe there. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of twists and turns along the way. And I think that those are interesting stories, and the biggest thing that you can do is learn from those stories, both as an individual, but other people as well. And when you do that, there's a lot, just go through all of them. I give you a little bit of my history. My first job, which I think was one of my best jobs, was a garbage man. And so you can come from anywhere. My official title was maintenance director, but I worked at a summer camp and I literally was the garbage man. And I learned right away that, you know, when you had a job that you were proud of, and I would go and take the garbage to the dump and throw it in the dump. And when I came back to camp and I would walk through camp, people looked at me a certain way. And I felt, wow, this is a really important job. And then finally somebody told me it was because of the smell of the garbage. But you all got to start somewhere. But from there, University of Michigan, then I went to work at a big company. My dad was in small businesses his whole life. I remember as I was getting ready to graduate and had a job lined up, he sat me down and he said, well, I guess I maybe should have said this earlier, but if you really want to, I guess it'd be okay if you came into the family business. And I was like, what a great offer. You really want me, huh? But, and the reason was, it wasn't that he didn't like me, I don't think. It was really about, as a parent, you always want to see your kids do one thing better. And so for me, I had gone to college. My dad had never gone to college. You know, had grown up poor and had built himself up from there. And so it was really about, go get that professional job. So I started working in the banking industry, grew up through technology. I ended up as a CTO at Bank One when I left after about 15 years. I was lucky to actually have the same desk, figuratively, through that whole time, even though the name of the company changed a lot as we went through mergers and acquisitions. I had ABC driving school. It was interesting, as my dad finished and was getting ready to retire, he bought a retirement business, and I went in on it with him, and it was called ABC Driving School. And while I grew up as a, in the family of an entrepreneur, someone that, you woke up in the morning with your business, you went to sleep at night with your business, it was always on your mind. Then having a business with my father was another great learning experience. From there I went to CompuWare, and this was just a side thing while we were working at other places, but went to work at CompuWare and went from the technology side to the business side, which was another great step in my career, and that I learned the other side of it. While I was at CompuWare, I quickly became the e-commerce, e-business person. So this was between 1999 and 2001. And I met a business school professor, Dr. Klaus Fernell. And at CompuWare, we all did a lot of different jobs at that time. And my side job was to really help evaluate business opportunities and acquisitions and joint ventures that had something to do with e-commerce or e-business. And this was the time that it was all getting started. I met a business school professor, and he had an idea to take a technology to the web. And we had probably looked at 50 or 60 ideas from people, and none of them made sense. But this one really caught my fancy. I thought it was a great idea, it was a great concept. I went to Pete Karmanos, who was the CEO and founder, and said, hey Pete, I think we should do this. Not really a long story short, kind of a short story short. After one meeting with all of us, so we went off and built a business plan. We had one meeting with Pete, and Pete said, all right, let's go do this, Larry, put the company together, we'll put $10 million in it. Now, fundraising, and Skip can probably, is a good person to attest to this, is usually not that easy, right? But it was very easy, because we had a good idea. So we started a company in a little bit of a different way, which was ForeSee. During ForeSee, I wrote a book called Managing Forward. And we're not great at titles, but our books were all focused on the business side of it. So we really wanted to be able to focus on how companies can use analytics. And it was a marketing tool, and it was a great marketing tool. From there, we wrote another book called Innovating Analytics, and then in 2013, after having run the company for 14 years, we were actually on the verge of going IPO. So we had hired bankers, we were drafting the S1, and at that time, someone came and knocked on our door. And we listened, right? The best time to ever sell a business is when it's not for sale. And we ended up closing that deal literally on the last real business day of 2013, December 20th. And the interesting thing about it was, we had given them a deadline that if that deal didn't close by December 20th, we were going IPO, we weren't even going to listen anymore. And so literally on my drive home on the 19th, and I had a flight to Costa Rica on that Saturday at 6:30 in the morning, so there wasn't any leeway to make this deal happen after the 20th. Literally on my drive home on the 19th, the deal fell apart. And we also had a split board that some wanted us to go public and some wanted us to sell the company. So it was a lot of interesting dialogue through that night, and the deal ended up happening, and the rest you move on from there. So as we think about ForeSee, and what really helped us was the ability to have a vision early on. I remember we had an employee, one of our first employees, and she left and went to London, got married, came back to work for us on a part-time basis like 8-9 years later. And as she came back and she was getting reacquainted with the company, she said to me, it's remarkable that the vision is still the same. So a lot of companies a lot of startups talk about pivoting, and everybody says it's okay to fail. I took a little bit different approach. I was scared shitless to fail. And I actually think that's a really good attitude that an entrepreneur should take. Failure is not something that anybody should accept. Once you fail, you got to brush yourself off and get right back after it, right? So failure is not a black mark on your career forever. But going into a business and saying, it's okay if I fail, to me is not the right approach. When you're coaching sports, I coach my kids playing baseball. When I played baseball, I never walked up and said, it's okay if I strike out. If I struck out or my kid struck out, I pat him on the back and said, it's okay that you did, get back in there, right? So we really were able to stick to that vision and execute on it. And I actually think that in today's world, sometimes, it's okay, go fail, it's okay, go fail, it's okay, go fail, is usually more of a VC's mindset than I think what an entrepreneur should be personally. So I take maybe a little different tack there than others. Again, once you fail, it's okay, we get better, we learn from it, and we move on. Our business was a good business. We had a great business model. We were really focused on measuring the customer experience, and we had a great economic model as well. It was a SaaS business, software as a service, so it had a very good subscription. We had incredible customer retention. We would grow our business by about 20% a year before we ever added a customer, because our existing customers would stay with us and they would buy more from us every year. So we built a really, really good economic model that gave us a lot of flexibility, a lot of power, a lot of ability to do things and keep reinvesting in the company. And it was all about growth. We took another tack that's a little bit different than the startups you hear about when you read the papers about the things in the Bay Area. We wanted to get to a point of being cash flow positive and EBITDA profitable very, very quickly. We started the business in 2001, and we really, really sucked at timing. So our first beta customer was a week after 9/11. And not a really good time. And Klaus Fornell is an economist by trade. I would call him every week after that and say, what's going to happen with this economy? And every week he'd tell me the same thing. If there's not another terrorist attack, eventually it's going to get better. After about 5, 6 years of hearing that, I stopped calling. You know, in a way, when you start with difficult situation, and we were bringing a technology that was totally incremental to everything that they did. So it wasn't replacing anything. If you really are honest, there was no direct return on investment. When you bought our product, you didn't make more money. You got smarter, which allowed you to make more money, allowed you to improve your business, but it by itself, there was no return on investment. Just like when you buy a computer, there's no return on investment. It's what you do with the computer. When you get a college degree, there's no return on investment from just getting that degree. It's about utilizing it, learning from it, getting better and smarter. So we had to build, actually the time that we started really built our culture to a great extent. And I think culture is really, really important for a company. And I remember learning this from Carmanos, that you can't, as a CEO, make the culture. You can't, as a leadership team, make the culture. The team makes the culture. The organization makes the culture. And every new person that comes into that organization helps change your culture. But we had this heritage that we started in a very difficult economic time, and it caused us to really prove out that we would provide great value to our customers. And that was the culture that we tried to maintain as that organization grew. And we spent a lot of time focusing on those attributes to our employees and making sure that they all understood what our vision was. There's also just a ton of surprises that happen along the way, which it's impossible to anticipate, because that's what makes them a surprise, right? And we all face them, and the difficulty is figuring out what steps to take and what reactions to have when those surprises come. And I think that's probably the things that I learned the most of. So when you think about it, you know, what things do you learn from starting up a company and running a company? The first thing, it takes a good idea. But it doesn't necessarily take a great idea. It doesn't take the best idea to be successful. I really think the companies that are the most successful are those that have incredible execution, right? A good idea helps. A great idea is phenomenal, but it's really about your ability to execute. It's not being first that's most important. So anybody know what the first desktop operating system was? CPM. Wasn't Windows, right? What was the first search engine? Rich, don't answer this because you know too many of these. Anybody know what the first search engine was? It wasn't Google. Right? It's hardly ever the first that's a long-term survival. And you can go back in history and look at, you know, the first airline, the first automobile company, the first ship manufacturer way back in the day, the first railroad. They weren't the ones that benefited the most because it was about execution. So I think working hard is a key thing to growing a company. Building that great leadership team, it really is about the team. You know, I went to University of Michigan. I'm a big Michigan football fan even today. And, you know, the team really meant something. We literally would play that speech to our company, you know, at least once a year. And we felt it, and we acted like it. And it wasn't just words, it was something that we acted and lived. I think some of my proudest moments had to do with employees and their families. I remember we had a picnic one year, and every year we'd have an event with not only the employees, but their families. And a lady that was just gone on maternity leave about, I guess, 3-4 weeks, or about 6 weeks earlier, and she showed up with her baby in a bib that said ForeSee on it. Now, we didn't make those, we didn't sell those, but her just, you know, to me it was the most heartwarming thing I'd ever seen, that we had built a team that felt like we were a family. And I remember from one of the executives I had early on, said, he stood up in front of the company and said, we're a family. And then he said, no, we're not really a family, you can't fire your brother, right? And, but I think having that employees feel like they're a family is incredibly important, and really can be the difference between success and failure for a company, because no matter how good your idea is, no matter how hard you work as an entrepreneur, if you don't have a great team that's working just as hard as you, your chance of success is very, very, very low. Other things you need, I think, are great mentors and great advisors. I think you can also learn as much from people that make mistakes and did things wrong. I think of some of my bosses I had as I was moving up, and there's one, I will not mention his name, but I learned more from him the things he did wrong than the things he did right. So when you're stuck in that situation where you got someone that's not doing things the right way, it doesn't mean you can't learn from them. Our reviews, and you'll love this, Rob, our employee reviews, every year I would be on the phone. I don't know how he knew I was on the phone. He'd walk in my office, hand me a piece of paper, and shake my hand and walk out. And by the time I got back to his office to ask for some feedback, he was working on a crossword puzzle. And he was really good at crossword puzzles. So, everybody has their calling. But at the end of the day, you can learn a whole lot from people, both good and bad. But to be successful in a company, you also need a lot of, you need capital, right? Which is a challenge for all organizations. And the last one I think is really important. I think you need an incredible support network behind you that understands it. Without that, if you're really going after and trying to build a growth company, you're working 60, 80, 100 hours a week. It's your life, it's your love. You bleed it, the company, and that's the way it should be. I'll never forget this. My son, when I sold ForeSee in 13, and I left, and about 4 or 5 weeks later, I left the company, and my kids weren't really expecting that. And my son, who was out working, living on his own, was totally panicked that I was not going to be able to handle this. And every day he'd call my wife, "What's Dad going to do today? Is he okay? He can't just sit home. He's going to go crazy." And it was an adjustment for me, but it's good to have that supportive family. Without that, you really can't accomplish very much. So the first book, Managing Forward, was really all about taking this concept that analytics can give your company a competitive advantage. So there are a lot of ways as a company you can succeed, right? You can have the best product out there, and you can have great marketing, you can have great execution, right? There's different ways you can be successful. But there's also the ability to use data and analytics to give yourself a competitive advantage. That you're making better decisions. That you're able to move forward and use that data analytics so you're not just managing by gut and instinct. When you're small, you manage by gut and instinct. You have no choice. But as your company grows, as you start to get better analytics and better data, there's a lot you can do with it. And if you're able to make better decisions, you will succeed. I think a great example, and I had the great fortune of spending a couple of evenings with this guy at dinners, and he spoke at one of our conferences, is Billy Beane from the Moneyball book and movie. And is everybody familiar with Moneyball? So what's interesting is if you watch the movie, he talked, so it's all about we're going to use on-base percentage as a way to evaluate players, right? And nobody else was doing that. Well, long before the book came out, kind of everybody in baseball figured it out. And if that's all he was going to use going forward, he wouldn't have done a very good job, right? He's the most successful GM in baseball in terms of making the playoffs, coming from a small market. The record is phenomenal. The key for him was every year they had to come up with another set of analytics, another way to apply that data, different metrics to give them a competitive advantage. And that really spawned, after I met him the first time, that really spawned the idea of the second book, because it's not just about great analytics, it's about innovating analytics. It's about keeping one step ahead of everybody else. And so innovating analytics was really about the intersection of three concepts. The customer experience, which is what we were all focused on as a company, about innovation, and about analytics. And bringing all three of those concepts together. And we took at least one word out of there. It could have been innovating analytics for customer experience. So we shortened it a little bit. And the example in the book, which is a lot of the book, is how we took a metric called NPS, or Net Promoter Score. Is anybody familiar with NPS? A few of you. This is a guy that did a great marketing job. His name is Fred Reichel. I know he's not in the room because I would recognize him, so I'll say something nasty about it. Well, actually, you can tell him. I've said it to his face.
This is going live on CNN.
All right, good. Hey, Anderson Cooper, how you doing? So the interesting thing about Net Promoter is it's one question. And the concept is there's only one question you need to know. But the reality is it wasn't a very good metric. And I'll actually explain why. And when it first came out, he did everything right. First an HBR article, then a book. when it first came out, and just incredible marketing around it. When it first came out, I remember reading it and going, wow, this is interesting. This is, in our field, this is something we need to be aware of. I went over to the university with Klaus, and he had all his scientists with him, and I said, did you guys read this? And they like, Larry, why are you wasting our time? This is the stupidest thing ever. No one in their right mind is ever going to believe this. And of course, it became wildly popular. It was, every company in the world was talking about it, right? So logic doesn't always win. The best solution doesn't always win. He won with great marketing and great execution. So that's what we talk about in this book, and I'll go through a little more detail about that in terms of what it really is and how we made it better, which was our way of innovating, right? And when you think about innovation, most people think about innovation as this great breakthrough idea that's going to change mankind, right? We're going to boil the ocean, we're going to solve world hunger, whatever it is. But the reality is that innovation can be incremental, it can be a small change, it can be a small improvement, it can be a major breakthrough, right? It's about doing something different, doing something new that adds value. And so that's really the right way to look at innovation. And there's some really good examples of companies that haven't done a great job of innovating. And when you don't innovate, you actually won't do so well as a company. So think about that. Can you hit the next slide? When you think about that, that if you're not innovating, you're going to go away as a company at some point in time. Why? Anybody know why? Why do you have to innovate to be a successful company?
Someone else will.
Keeps you unique. Someone else is going to eventually catch up to you, right? It's not hard to copy what other people are doing. And there's great examples of companies that have really struggled to do that. The other big challenge with innovation is if you're a successful company, you're managing by the finances of the company, right? Is innovation a good thing financially for this year, for next year? Usually not, right? If I'm going to innovate, what happens? I make big investments in things, I bring more staff in to do things, and is that helping my bottom line this year? So it's about innovation is about investing in the future, the next generation. And a lot of companies have tried to do it and done it unsuccessfully. So it's a very difficult concept to do within a successful company. I'll give you one really quick example. I think Toyota is probably one of the best examples of being able to have a company that was if you go back to the 80s and as Toyota really came and became a stronghold in the US, and what was the basis of that? It was about quality, right? They had great quality, they had a great manufacturing system, you know, they were doing things phenomenally well, you know, continuous improvement, right? Little tweaks making the car a little bit better. But then they did something incredibly difficult in that they created Lexus, a totally different kind of company with a totally different approach. And they did it in a certain way. They created a new division and really ran it as a separate company. Some people do it within, right? So innovation is a real challenge, but if we don't innovate, we're going to go away. Eventually, someone's going to catch up and pass us by, whether it's a new technology, right? Think of companies like Kodak, Xerox, and they're still around a bit, but I mean, these companies have really gone to the bottom because they weren't able to innovate. And it's a challenge if you're the CEO of a company and it's a large company, whether it's a board-driven, you know, private investors or whether it's public, what are you worried about? What's your biggest worry as a CEO of a large company? That quarter. So you're actually incented not to innovate because innovate costs money. And finding that right balance is really the key to things. Analytics, let's talk about that for a minute. So analytics, really the ability to take data and analyze it, and we hear a lot about big data today, and big data is a great concept, and the rate at which we gather data is mind-blowing. I actually went and saw a Motown musical last night, phenomenal, if any of you get a chance to see it, it's really fun. But as we were leaving the restaurant, we were a little late, my phone buzzed, my wife looked at it because I was driving, and she says, why is Google telling you have 14 minutes to get down there? You know, how do they know that, right? That's big data. It's sneaky, it's a little annoying. She's like, that's really creepy. How do they know that? So I said, well, they're reading my email. She's like, you don't let me read your email, you're letting Google read it? But that's big data. That's one application of big data, right? And most people don't even realize what they're doing. They know where you are, they know you every step of the way on your phone. Unless you've turned it off, they know every step you take. Your phone now can tell you how many steps you took in a day. Did I tell it to do that? No, it was watching me, it was listening to me, it was monitoring me, right? So we're gathering so much data, and the biggest challenge with big data is how we use it, I believe. And there's lots of examples about companies misusing data. And that's going to be the big item for the next 5 years as companies have more and more data, know more and more things about you. And are they going to give it to your health insurers? Are they going to, it's going to go to your financial records, right? Google knows all your emails. If you owe someone, a neighbor, $5,000, Google probably knows about it, right? What are they going to do with it? That's going to be the big challenge for big data. But analytics is taking that data and making it useful. Because big data without great analytics is a waste of time. In fact, it can actually be misleading and take you in the wrong direction, right? We can take any somebody told me they were almost a statistics major. I don't remember who it was this morning, but it was you, right? So you can take data. What can you do with data? Could you make it a good story and a bad story at the same time?
Absolutely.
All the time, right?
This morning.
Right, exactly, right? So if we use okay analytics on big data, we get crappy results. And the worst thing is when you do that, is you go, wow, I'm using data and I'm using analytics. I gotta be right. So you get this false sense of security. So I always called it garbage in, garbage out, right? If you got bad data or bad analytics, it's gonna be misleading. It's gonna take you in the wrong direction. Actually, can you go back a slide? This is one of my favorite sayings. You cannot manage what you don't measure. And it actually goes back to the days of Deming. I never knew where I heard it. I know I didn't make it up. And I started Googling, and of course they know everything, so they eventually got me to the point of realizing that Deming, the father of the quality movement, was one of the first guys to really use this phrase. But I actually will take that a little bit further. It's not just about you can't manage what you don't measure. I would actually challenge you to say that you can't improve something if you're not measuring. Anybody disagree with that? The reason you can't improve something if you're not measuring it is because how would you know that you improved it? All you will know is that it changed. And if you want to do a personal experience, a personal experiment, you can go try this. I tried it 1 year with my golf score. I'm trying to get it, so when I sold the business, my goal was to get better at golf. It hasn't worked yet. I had one of my mentors who was on our board for a while, Joe Nathan. He was the president of CompuWare, and I remember he retired, he left our board. About 2 years later, he called me up, hadn't talked to him in a while. I said, Joe, how's retirement? He goes, I failed at retirement. I said, how can you fail at retirement? Which I can tell you can happen pretty easy. He failed at retirement because he said, my whole goal was to get my handicap down. I played golf every day, I took a ton of lessons, I kept getting it lower and lower and lower, and all I did was I kept losing more money on the golf course. So he went back to work. But so if you stop keeping score at golf, I guarantee you, you will think you're doing better. And then once you start keeping score and play that $5 game with your buddy, you will lose money because you really aren't any better, right? Same thing, if you don't get on the scale, you always think you lost weight. If your kid doesn't look at his GPA, he always thinks he got all A's, right? It goes on and on and on. If we don't measure it, we actually can't improve. Now you could argue semantics, but we would have no way of knowing if we improve. So measurement is so key for everything we do. And as a business, one of the things that I think is really important is to evolve your metrics and analytics as you grow your business. So day one, you don't need 1,000 metrics. You're going to manage the business with 3 people by instinct and by looking at your cash in your bank account. That's the only metric you need. But as you grow, you need more and more metrics. And people create metrics and they dream up metrics and you get all these benchmarks. We would, at our board meetings towards the end, we would have huge benchmark reports about SaaS, software as a service company analytics, so we could compare ourselves on gross margin, on all these different metrics so we knew what was going on. The other key thing is what you measure is going to determine what you do. Many times people measure the wrong thing, right? And so we think we're getting important data, or think we're getting great insights, but we're measuring the wrong thing. So that's another really important aspect of analytics. The customer experience. When we started the company in 2001, we called it customer satisfaction. And over time, we started to migrate our terminology to the phrase customer experience. And customer experience is a really hot phrase right now. So while Rob isn't excited about the title Innovating Analytics, investors actually were really excited, right? Because there's these 3 concepts of innovation, analytics, and customer experience were 3 really, really hot trends and still are today. And everybody talks about customer experience. But the customer experience is hard to get your arms around because it's about every aspect of an interaction you have with a company. And it applies with individuals as well. So when we think about Amazon, who is hands down been the best in customer experience for every year since we started measuring them, which was I think in 2003. Every year they're at the top. To the point of Bezos would put on his website a letter thanking his customers because they were #1 in the ForeSee index every year, right? But when you think about that, it's with every aspect of it, down to the product being shipped to you, right? The box, how it's packed. They actually took a big hit one year when they first started selling other products on their site, which is a great business model. I have no inventory costs. You're buying things that I don't own, and I'm making money on it. So it really helps my financials a lot. But what happened is that they had trained the consumer to expect that great customer service from Amazon. And when Amazon started, no one in the right mind thought they would be any good at customer service because they did not have a 1-800 number. They did not have operators that would answer the phone. But if you emailed them with a problem, it was resolved. No questions asked. And they were able to do it, and if you're in the e-com world, or in the retail world at all, everybody hates Amazon. And they hate Amazon because they play by different rules. So Amazon is not held to the same standards that Macy's is, that Target is, that Nordstrom is, that anybody is, financially by analysts. That's a whole other 40-minute conversation. But the point is that Bezos always thought that the most important thing was satisfying that customer. Because he knew if he satisfied him, he would be a customer forever. And how many of you guys shop at Amazon? How many of you shop at Amazon 50% of the things you buy? I mean, that is remarkable that anybody would raise their hand that 50% of the things they buy from one store? I mean, think about that. What's the next highest store behind that? Next highest retailer? 3%? 5%? People that use Prime, and these numbers are all different kinds of numbers and never been validated, but somebody once told me that a non-Prime customer, which is their loyalty program that you pay for, would on the average do 3 to 4 purchases a year, and a Prime customer would do over 50. So they did it by just delivering a great experience. So our belief on customer experience is there was nothing more important in the world to the success of a business than the customer experience, right? It is more important today than it's ever been before. And it's more important today than it's ever been before because things have evolved. Right, so how many people are planning on doing at least 50% of their shopping this holiday season online? Right, quite a few of you. That didn't exist 15 years ago, right? So, but how has that really changed the customer experience? Well, consumers are smarter now than they've ever been before, right? It used to be that if you walked into a retailer and you walked up to a blue shirt at Best Buy or wherever, that associate, they knew more about the products than you did, right? You maybe, if you were really diligent, you bought a consumer report, a magazine, and you read a story about the 4 products in that issue. But they were different models than they had in the store, which was part of their strategy, right? So that associate knew more than you did. What happens today? That tide is totally turned. I walk into a store and I know more about it than that associate. I know what the competitors' products are like, I know what the prices are. Instead of a 3x5 card next to it that says what the product is, I've got 14 pages online of detailed specifications and reviews from other people. Other people told me whether they liked it or not. I didn't have to say, hey, you had a lot of good experience with this product? Like the associate's going to say, no, this product really sucks, right? I'm going to tell you the truth. No, they're not. So we're smarter. We have more information. The internet has made everything so transparent. But the most important thing I think that most people don't think about is that the switching costs have gone to near zero because of technology. It started with the internet, and then with mobile it's even gone further. What do I mean by that? Switching costs, right? As a business, if it costs somebody to change to another competitor, that's a switching cost. And so when we make decisions about who we do business with, we evaluate whether we're thinking about it or subconsciously, what's the effort or the cost for me to go from company A to company B? Well, with mobile and web, that's gone to near zero. In other words, I can be in Target, pull on my phone, scan it, and in 3 seconds buy it from Amazon. Boom, I switched. No cost to me. So it's made loyalty very, very hard. The ways that companies build loyalty, I mean, I'm going to guess that everyone has at least 5 loyalty programs they're in. Anybody have less than 5? Anybody have more than 20? Right? I mean, But those aren't even loyalty programs, because what's loyalty? Loyalty is an undying allegiance to a brand or a product. What they're selling you is a retention program. I'm going to pay you to come back. I'm going to give you points. I'm going to give you miles. I'm going to give you rewards. I'm going to give you a discount next time. But consumers are getting smarter. And now the real only way to get true loyalty is by delivering a great experience. So that regardless of what everyone else tells me, you're the first place I think about. And that's every business's and every company's goal. And if you can accomplish that, you're incredibly successful. So, the business challenge so that's sort of the background for Innovating Analytics. Now I'm going to get into the meat of what we did with NPS. So any business, I believe, these are the challenges you face. And while they're simple and most people go, yeah, I knew that. If I painted this slowly and said, all right, what are the business challenges? My guess is people wouldn't list these things. But really the way we have a business and grow our business is by a couple of different things. We have to keep our existing customers. That part of the revenue is really important to our business. We have to sell more to our existing customers. And then we have to gain new customers. So on average, if anybody wants to share this that has a business, it would be great. If you had to guess what percentage of your business comes from customer retention, what would it be? Any ideas? 80%? Sometimes 90, sometimes 95, sometimes 100. Very rarely is it 5 or 10%. So let's just use 80%, keep that in mind. Out of customer upsell, selling more to my existing customers, anybody have any ideas on what kind of numbers we usually see there? Usually 10%. If you're doing 20% upsell with your customers, you're doing a great job, right? Because that means you got 20% growth if you keep them all. Even if you lose 5%, you're still doing great. So the majority of our business is coming, revenue of success is coming from retention and upsell. And then we're going to acquire customers. Right? We always need to acquire new customers. And then if we can make them loyal, they're incredibly valuable over the lifetime value of a customer. And we're going to acquire them one of two ways generally, or a combination of these. We're going to acquire them through marketing, right? It's going to be, we're going to put out ads, we're going to do coupons, we're going to have TV commercials, we're going to fly banners over the Michigan games, whatever it is. Or they're going to come to us because they heard about us from somebody else, word of mouth. All of these are driven by the customer experience. I can't keep my customers unless I deliver a great experience to them. They will not buy more from me unless I've delivered a great experience to them, right? And when I go to acquire a new customer, word of mouth is clearly driven by a great experience, but marketing is too. And it's the experience you have with that company, that marketing. So when we talk about customer experience, it's not just once you bought a product, it starts with the first time you hear about it, right? So if you get a call from a marketer during dinner, and they just keep talking while you're trying to hang up on them, that's not a really good experience. You usually will not do business with that company. So it's every touch point makes up that customer experience. So the key is that when you get right down to it, all of those things are driven by customer experience. Companies should be thinking about customer experience. The satisfaction that their customers have is a strategic asset for their organization. And in most cases, what we did at ForeSee was we took something that was soft, like customer satisfaction, and we put hard, quantitative, and qualitative, but quantitative was the key, metrics behind it. So you could measure and evaluate and track it every day at every touch point across your organization. Because if you're not using it as a strategic asset, the bottom line is you're going to make bad investments, right? You're going to miss opportunities, you're going to focus your efforts on the wrong things, you're going to make mistakes time and time again. But most importantly is you're going to disconnect with your customers, and they're not going to be loyal. They're going to go elsewhere. So that caused us to introduce the word of mouth index. WOMI. Again, not a great name, but nonetheless. So naming wasn't our strong suit. It's usually driven because you got to get that .com to go with it, which makes things crazy. So the word of mouth index, the idea was there was this thing called Net Promoter that I mentioned earlier that was incredibly popular. And I would say 60–70% of our clients that were spending a lot of money with us were using Net Promoter. And it would be something they would report up because their CEO told them, because it was a CEO-driven sale for Net Promoter. And then the guy that actually had responsibility to improve, he would ignore that and use our data to help them improve. So it was a frustrating thing to us. And we tried to compete. We didn't really have to compete with it. We sort of supported it in a way, but it was annoyance. It was just made us mad. So after years and years of testing, we came up with this concept called word of mouth index. Next slide. So if we go back to this slide and think about these things that drove our business, one more time. The only one of those that is driven by the concept of net promoter, because net promoter asks a single question: how likely are you to recommend this to a friend or colleague? From very unlikely to extremely likely. How likely to recommend this? Now, everybody would tell you that if you're going to recommend this product, that's a really good thing. So I will tell you that most of you are probably loyal to a brand of toilet paper in your household, right? You probably have the same kind every week, and if you do the shopping, you buy the same kind. If your spouse or partner does the shopping and they came home with a different kind, you would notice and go, what went on here, right? So we're incredibly loyal to toilet paper. So I'm going to ask a question. I really don't want anyone to answer it, because it's a little embarrassing when you do. How many of you ever recommended a brand of toilet paper to a friend or a colleague? She raised her hand.
Can't help it.
Is it Charmin? Is Charmin still around? I don't know. Kirkland version of Charmin. Most people don't recommend things like toilet paper, right? And the point is, I can give you 1,000 examples of that, where we are incredibly loyal to something, we're a great customer, and yet we will not recommend it to a friend or a colleague. It might be because it's one of those things you just don't talk about. So if I bought this, does anybody here work at JCPenney? They're just fun to pick on. And it's actually more fun to say this when someone says, yes, I do. But I did not buy this coat at JCPenney. But if I did, I probably wouldn't say, hey guys, I bought this at JCPenney. Right? No, nothing against JCPenney, but it's not necessarily the image I may want to portray. Right? So there's all kinds of reasons why we don't recommend things. But at the end of the day, this most important metric that people were relying on, bonuses were being paid on this metric at companies. Literally, huge Fortune 100 companies, their bonuses for their top execs were being paid on their net promoter score, if people are likely to recommend you. Yet that doesn't really drive most of your business. We said that probably 95% of your business comes from retention and upsell. A little bit comes from acquiring people through marketing, and a little bit comes from word of mouth. So why would that be the one metric that we'd want to base our bonuses on? Anybody want their bonuses based on something that it makes up 2% of your business? Probably not. In fact, it will drive the wrong behavior. So we watched this and it just made us mad. Mad as hell. I mean, really, we would get red in the face when we talk about net promoter. When my sales guys wanted to see me go off at a sales meeting, they'd ask me something about net promoter, and I'd go ranting and raving, and they'd all get going. So you got to entertain them sometimes at work too. Next slide. So this is sort of a graphical representation to help you kind of get that crystal clear image about how much of your business really comes from this stuff, right? So in year one, all the business you have next year, in year two, is all about renewing that business, right? So if you're growing at 10% a year, which most companies would be thrilled with, right? We grew, I don't know if I mentioned this before, my biggest point of pride in our company's financial history was every quarter we were in business, we grew our revenue, right? And we would grow between 25 and 35% every year. But we grow 25% in 2012, now I got 25% more business that's already there that I've got to renew. So even with great growth, only 25% of my business is new every year. And roughly 2/3 of that was coming from existing customers. So even in a high growth business, not that much was coming from word of mouth. Next slide. So this is how Net Promoter works, for those of you that don't know. So I'm going to teach you about the bad thing first. Right? 0 to 10 scale. Question, how likely to recommend this to a friend or colleague? So if it was a product, or if it was a running shoe, you'd say, how likely to recommend this running shoe to a friend or colleague? And people answer. And they called everybody that was 6 and below a detractor. If you were 7 and 8, you were passive. And if 9 and 10, you were a promoter. And NPS was calculated based on the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. So one simple, easy number. The funny thing is, most executives that bonuses were based on it, you'd say, how do you guys calculate NPS? And they're like, I'm not really sure, but I get a number in a report every month. So if we think about this, next slide. The reality is that NPS, actually go back one slide, sorry. If you said that you're not very likely to recommend it, let's say you gave it a 3, what does that mean? Well, it means you're not very likely to recommend it. Did it mean that you wouldn't? Did it mean that you're never going to? Well, it's not that likely. I may still recommend it. right? So it's got a lot of flaws in it. And the fact is that these folks that say, I'm not likely to recommend it, doesn't mean they're a detractor. When I think of the word detractor, I think of someone that says bad things about my product. Someone that says, you guys suck and I'm going to tell everybody about it. And then today with social media and Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter, you can do that really, really, really quick. But I didn't say I was going to say something negative. I didn't say I was going to detract from your business. I simply said I'm not going to recommend. All right, next slide. So Net Promoter, though, in all fairness, had some great things, right? It really focused companies on how important customers were. It got huge budgets allocated to this kind of information, these kind of approaches at companies, right? So that was a positive. They would get huge budgets and they would spend them on ForeSee to help us improve it, which was great. We loved it in a way. It really focused on the power of word of mouth. So this guy, Fred Reichelt, again, in many ways, I hate him, in many ways I love him. He came up with this concept before Facebook. He came up with this concept before Twitter, right? Before these things that propelled and magnified the word of mouth. In concept, it was also pretty simple and easy to understand. Well, I told you the negative side of it. If I came to you today and said, hey, if your customers recommend you to other people, that's phenomenal, isn't it? Isn't that the goal? That you make them so incredibly happy they're willing to tell other people about it? Everyone would say, yeah, that's what I want. At ForeSee, that's what we wanted. But at the end of the day, it's not the most predictive metric, but it's something we strive for. The other big point, and this is actually, in many ways, a huge value that comes out of almost any program you implement for a short period of time, is if I brought my whole company together and said, this year the most important thing we're going to do is we're going to satisfy our customer. We're going to get them to recommend us. We're going to rally the whole company about one concept. I'm going to see an improvement without making any other changes in my business. And the improvement is now I've made it a focus of every employee. So when I do that, that helps in itself. So people got false positives in year one because they'd see their scores go up, they'd see everything be good about their business, because that was the program of the day. Next slide. Next, hit one, yeah, there you go. Actually go back one, sorry. We didn't have a remote, so it's a little awkward here. And I mentioned this before, but I'm going to make this point again because it's so important. The phrase detractors is incredibly misleading. They are not bad for your business if they're not going to recommend them. We don't know if they're good or bad, so keep that thought in mind. Next slide. So we did testing. We were data geeks. We did an enormous amount of testing over years and years about ways to improve this metric. At first, we spent a lot of time proving it wrong, which we did, but really didn't help us a whole lot, other than we knew it and we proved it with, I'm talking millions and millions of respondents, millions and millions of points of data. Then we sat down, we actually did this at a board meeting. It was funny, one of our board members, their company was using MPS. And so this was a company we had a board tie with. And the board member says, hey, this company's using MPS, they swear by it. So Klaus, the business school professor, starts getting red in the face and gets all crazy, and I get a little crazy. And the other board member says, well, why don't you guys just adopt it? It's like, well, we can't do that, it's wrong, right? Even if it's right for the business today, it's wrong, morally, ethically, and long term. We know that, right? So we said, well, all right, what can we do? So we came up with the idea of let's make it better. Let's build on it. Let's innovate and make it incrementally better. Not innovate and make it something totally different. It's unrelated. And it was interesting how we went through this. We set a bunch of criteria that was critical. It had to be simple, so they used one question. We said we could use 2 at the most, but no more than that. And our typical surveys, if you took one, is usually 20 to 30 questions. So we weren't going to change that, but for this calculation, it had to be 2 questions or less. It had to have the exact same question, the same way it was already asked. And the reason that was so important is we wanted to eliminate a barrier for people to adopt us. And so if I went to you and said, you got to throw out this metric that your board's bonus is based on, you're not going to do it. But if I said you had one more question, and just run this in parallel for a while and see what the data tells you, and make your own decision, and it doesn't cost you anything because you're already asking questions, you'd probably say, sure, I got nothing to lose. More data, let me make the decision. So that was the idea behind it. And so we did our testing and we proved out that in addition to asking likely to recommend, we wanted to identify true detractors. So we asked the question, how likely are you to discourage other people from doing business with this company? In other words, are you going to be that guy at United Airlines that guitar got smashed and he went out and told everybody they're bad? Or are you just going to be that guy that says, hey, something bad happened, I'm going to move on? So that was where word of mouth came from. So NPS, again, is taking the percentage of detractors and the percentage of recommenders and subtracting them. What we wanted to do was use the same formula, but use true detractors instead. So while this was based on you're likely to recommend and you're not likely to recommend, word of mouth was based on you're likely to recommend and you're likely to discourage. Relatively simple, but more precise, more accurate, truly identifying that behavior. So we implemented this question, we tested it, we tested it, we tested it. 1.6 million respondents over a 2-year period across 275 different companies. So we had a lot of data. Next. And just to give you a sense of how much data that was, a typical survey that we base decisions on all the time, if it has 1,000 or 2,000 consumers, it's huge. So these are just 2 examples, and these are both great research companies, Pew and Gallup. You know, this study was 2,500 people. This was 1,005. During the election, you know, they typically would have 300, 400, 500 respondents, and they would tell you who's going to win. Right? You know, they projected the race with, you know, what, 17% of the votes in and a 6% difference. I mean, right? Sampling works. But we said, well, we're just going to keep going and keep testing and testing and testing. And, you know, at the end of 14, it was like 7 million, 8 million respondents. Next slide. We found, on average, Net Promoter overstated detractors by 780%. So you walk into that CEO and say, listen, your bonus is based on this number, and it is overstated by 780%. And people were making decisions and basing bonuses on this. Next slide. And it wasn't just within one industry, right? The automotive guys did a whole lot better. They were only overstating detractors by 309%. Let's give a round of applause to the automotive industry. Right? All over the place. One more slide. Individual companies. These are good companies. Apple, overstated by 1,100%. 12% of the people said they wouldn't recommend. Only 1% said they would say something negative and discourage someone else from doing business. HSBC by 900%, Nike by 700%. And when you step back and think about this, this is really logical. This really makes sense. Next slide. So our approach was to take, and for the first 5, 6 years, 7 years of NPS being in it, if a CEO, if anybody that I was talking to in a sales meeting, and my sales guys, I went on a lot of sales calls, they would cringe. If it came out that they're using NPS, I would take at least 5 minutes and explain why it was so bad. Right? You got to throw it out, it's stupid, da, da, da. And usually the answer was, I know, but my boss told me to. Right? And we'd still do business with them. So we changed our tack and said, you know what, if you're using NPS, that's fine. But really, you got to bring word of mouth in, and you make the decision. Incremental improvement, innovation, one way of innovation. As a company, we did other ways of innovating. We created a new product. We actually bought a small, very, very small company that had some technology, and it was about 1/3 of the way where we wanted it. And we said, if you guys get to the end, we'll pay you money for the product and so on. And it was incredibly innovative. It allowed us to, this is, again, we didn't market it this way, so I'll give you the inside scoop, but this again gets in that creepy category a little bit. We would actually be able to see exactly what you did on the website, as if we were looking over your shoulder. We'd see how your mouse moved. We'd see when you backspaced. We'd see what you typed in the search, and we would replay that for our customers. The people that completed a survey, you not only knew what they were trying to do, whether they were satisfied, but you could see everything they did on that website, how many seconds they were on each page, what they did, where their mouse was, all those things, right? So as a company, we did both incremental improvements and did what you would call external or breakthrough improvements as well. But this concept was very much about incremental. Take NPS, add word of mouth index to it, and you're going to have a better metric. Next slide. And that's what led to this book. So the idea of the book was to try to promote this. Now, again, timing's not always great. We released this book about 3-4 months before we sold the company. So, you know, we had all these great marketing plans, and, you know, best plans often, you know, fall apart, right? But it was a lot of fun to do it, you know, so it's been a really good experience. Next. So then what, right? So exit. And a lot of times in exit, you stay with the company. If you talk to most founders, it's usually not something they really want to do, but you sort of feel you have to. Sometimes you're contractually obligated to do it. I wasn't contractually obligated, was willing to do it. Sometimes the strategy that a company has before an exit, and the acquire, and the strategy they have after the exit is often different. If you run a small business, if you are an entrepreneur, if you want to sell your company, long before you have that first guy approach you, a real interest, you got to come to grips that I'm going to sell this and I'm no longer in charge, and chances are I won't be there anymore. And we had people knocking our door throughout the 14 years, and the first time I remember that we got a sort of serious offer that was pretty good, I went home, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? If we sell this company, chances are I'm gone. You know, I'm not ready to retire yet, what am I going to do next? But you get to grips with it, because that's, if you're doing a startup that's a growth business, and I'll talk about what we do next, you know, you'll understand how this all comes together. But when I talk with entrepreneurs today, and they want to raise money and grow their business and accelerate their growth, you got to ask them why. There's nothing wrong with a lifestyle business, but you run it, manage it differently than a business that you're building to exit, or building to IPO. So, next. After I exited, I literally, you know, on a Wednesday, I had a discussion with the new owners, and I said, I'm done. And we agreed that the end of the week would be the time. And on Monday, well, probably not Monday, but probably a week later, you know, guys at Spark and other places, or somebody, I don't know who, I think it was Spark, but other guys I know around town, you know, knew about it and started sending people my way. Hey, this company, you know, you need some help. Larry's probably not doing anything this week, go call him. And actually, I really enjoyed it, because it made my son, I told you before about, that was so nervous. I said, yeah, I had a lunch today, I'm fine. So, but I got a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and actually really enjoyed sitting down and meeting with people. And I'd get home and I'd be a little excited. My wife would say, what'd you do today? I said, oh, I went to lunch, you know. And she'd look at me kind of funny, but, and you know, I'd say I met with this company, and you know, here's what they're doing, and here's their challenge, and I suggested these 3 or 4 things, and she goes, did you get paid? And I was like, no, why would I want to get paid? But it was fun. We had a lot of fun, and I did that for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then about 3/4 of my management team also left the organization 3 or 4 weeks later. And you know, as you leave a company, it's definitely a big adjustment. I remember actually going and talking to Rob. 7 days after I left, one of my board members was now on the board of a public company. And literally 7 days later, and I love this guy, 7 days later he comes and he goes, you ready? I'm like, to do what? Go back to work. They're like, well, no. And they wanted me to be the CEO of a public tech company. And there's not a lot of, you know, public tech companies around town, and it's like, well, you know, these chances don't come by very often. And I was really conflicted, to be really honest with you. And I went and saw Rob, and actually, well, before I saw Rob, I told him no. I said, hey, you know, it's just too soon. You know, it's I can't do this right now. I just need to, you know, unwind a little bit. I was working 80, 100 hours a week. You know, I just wanted to relax and enjoy it. And I said I suck at timing earlier when we started the company in 2001. I proved that again when we sold it. And on December 20th, and I left in the middle of January. And my wife was like, what are you going to do now? You can't go play golf. I was like, well, I could. You just can't come with me, you know. But anyway, you know, there's nothing to do. It was a horrible winter. Couldn't go, you know, nothing to do. So again, I sucked at timing. But as you go through that process, you kind of realize that, you know, boy, I don't want to do this right now. So I told them no, and then I said, I just need time. Maybe if it was in the fall, I'd reconsider. The guy says, I totally get it. The next day he calls me back, doubled the offer just about, and said, take 2 months off and start May 1. It's like, now what do you do? So Rob had reached out to me, coincidentally, to say, hey, let's catch up, and he actually walked me through an exercise that validated in my own mind that it was the right thing. And I remember going to my wife, you know, at first she was totally supportive, and then I told her they doubled the offer, and she goes, well, maybe you should go do this, you know? Thanks. But next slide. So as the rest of the team sort of left ForeSee, and you know, they were calling saying, hey, what do we want to do next, and so on. It was such a great team. You know, there's so many things when I think back about those 14 years there that I was so incredibly proud of. But you know, it takes a really long time to build a good team, and we built a phenomenal team. You know, I'll never forget this, as I told our management team that I was leaving, so this was like on a Thursday before our big holiday party, which we always do in January. You know, there's 7 grown men and 1 woman were all crying because I'm leaving the company. And I just sold the company. I wasn't really sad. But you know, we all were, because we really, I mean, we still all get together and go out for dinner and hang out, and our wives all know each other, and spouses know each other. And you know, we were so close and so good and so together and thinking the same way that it just didn't feel natural. It would feel like if you were thrown out of your house. And that's kind of what it felt like. But so the team part of the team came back and said, hey, well, what's next? Let's go figure it out. And so we formed second stage partners, which is what I'm doing now. And it's really about, when I got all these phone calls and these emails and I met with people, I heard this sort of same story from almost every company. And again, most of them were tech oriented. There were a few others that were a little outside of that. But almost all of them had a product. They built something that was pretty darn good. Definitely good enough. And they were doing okay. In most cases, they had some revenue or they had a strategy. But what they all suffered from was the same thing: how to accelerate their growth. And I started hearing the same story again and again and again. And I started thinking a little bit about it. And Spark has just been incredibly supportive of ForeSee and other companies around here. I went and met with Paul and said, it feels like we have an incredible infrastructure that Paul and Skip and Mike Finney and all those guys built at MEDC and at Spark and elsewhere about helping companies get started. Really incredible. And I went and I sat on the Tech Transfer Advisory Board. I went and talked to Ken Nisbet, and we had the same conversation. And it was incredible about these companies were able to get started. You mentioned SkySpecs, right? 7 aerospace engineers out of college. They won probably close to $1.5 million in contests in the last 2 years. I mean, that doesn't happen without things like Spark to help them, and professors at the university that are helping them, and so on. But there was no infrastructure built to help companies get to that second stage. There's a great program called First Customer, but it's not about I mean, that's an important step, right? You got to create a company, create a product, get your first customer, but really success is about the 100th and the 1,000th customer. And unfortunately, I mean, we have great resources in Michigan in most areas. My belief is in tech, specifically in B2B tech, there's very few, there's a few, but there's very few good sales and marketing people. And if you're sitting in the Bay Area, you go and you hire a CMO that's done it before, or if you're in New York, right? Or you hire sales guys that have done it before. But there's very few around here. So we had a team of people that wanted to do something together, and it was myself and our head of marketing, our head of biz dev and sales, and our head of product and delivery, and our head of HR and recruiting. And we came to the point of, well, maybe we can try to help these companies a little bit here and there. And so that was what second stage was, or second stage is. So we're helping companies really accelerate their growth by not only telling them what to do, right? It's, you know, how many of you guys have boards with VCs on them? A few? Is there any VCs in the room? Okay, all right, Dave. Dave's a little different. But most VCs have never run a business. They've never worked, I mean, all they've done is been a VC. And it's great for them to tell you once a month or once a quarter what to do. And then they leave, and they come back. And in most cases, their what to do is based on some other company that was successful. It's a help to hear those stories, but it doesn't always work for your company, right? And so we wanted to take a different approach. We didn't want to just tell people what to do. My view of the word consultant was always it was a dirty word, right? People came in and they told you what to do and then they left. At best, you told them they should tell you what to do, and then they left and got paid. So we wanted to take a different approach. So we actually created a process that we've used with a few companies to assess their maturity. One, we want to see how good they're doing across all different areas of their business. And because the biggest problem is when things get out of sync, and I'll explain that in a second. The second was to create a roadmap on how to go forward. But then the third was to do what we call step-in services. So our team, and we've got other resources as well, would actually go and play active interim roles with that company, helping them move it forward, right? So none of us really want to go back and be full-time, but we're more than willing to play any of those roles on a part-time basis and help you do the work, help you hire or hire and train and mentor the people you need to fill those roles, or take the people you have and mentor them, and then step aside. So step in, step out. But a little different than the value a VC can give you. which is giving you a story once a month. And some VCs go further than that, so it's totally unfair for me to paint everybody with one brush. But you need people there that you can call every day, and to be honest with you, you're going to ask a different question to someone that's not your boss than someone that is your boss. And I remember when I started ForeSee and someone would say, wow, that's great, you don't have any boss. You're your own boss. I said, no. For one, I got my wife. She's still there. That's just a joke. Well, it's actually not a joke. But just don't tell her I said it. Although she knows it. And now I had 4 board members that were my boss. So I went from 1 to 4. Right? It gets worse. It gets more complicated. And your boss isn't always the one. Sometimes they're the one you go for advice. But the idea is to give people other forms of that as well. Next slide. So we're really, actually go one more. So just 3 or 4 quick topics on the things that we think are really, really important about companies growing. And the first is synchronization. Most companies get way out of sync. I would meet with these companies that have a good product and have sold a little bit, and I'd say, wow, is your product good enough at this point? Oh yeah, we're killing it, it's great, we think it's best in market. What's the next most important thing for you to do? Well, our next version is going to come out, it's going to even be better. Right? We're going to make it better. Now, from a product perspective, that's really important. From a company perspective, I would ask the question, if it's good enough to sell, why the hell aren't you selling it? Well, shouldn't that be your focus? Every tech company starts off saying, we're a technology company, and we did that. I'd say 3 years in, purposefully, we started to say, we're a sales and marketing company. Tech guys would go, well, you don't love me anymore? And then you'd pull them aside and say, no, we're really a tech company, just don't tell anybody else. Right? Because it's important to keep improving your product, but you have to shift the focus as a leader to being focused on sales and marketing. Right? Because you can have the greatest product in the world, and if you can't execute on sales and marketing, you're not going to be very successful. Now, there are exceptions to that. The build it, I will come strategy, right? I'm going to build a great product, and everyone's going to knock on our door and kick our door down and buy it. It's not really a strategy, it's a prayer, first of all. And sometimes it gets answered, right? Sometimes you don't even need revenue, and someone will pay you $1 billion, right? Think Snapchat, or one of Instagram, or one of those companies. But if that's your strategy, you're probably, chances are really low that you're going to have any success. So be able to execute, but you got to keep these things in sync. So I don't want to be building up my product team and spending all my money and focus on product without building sales and marketing. Similarly, all right, I got some money now, I'm gonna go to market. I went and hired 6 salespeople. I'm still out of sync because I don't have any marketing support. And it just goes on. So if you can keep your company in sync as you grow, what happens is you get very efficient with your use of capital. So that was a key principle. Next. Scalability readiness. This is also really important. Is each part of your organization really ready to grow and take the next step? And one of the best traits of, I believe, of any leader, but especially of an entrepreneur and a CEO, is to be incredibly self-critical. You should constantly be ridiculing yourself and making yourself feel horrible because of all the things you did wrong last week. But then you're able to get better because you can't fix what's you don't know is broken, right? The old saying. You got to operate. At least that's how I operate, right? We walk out of any sales call, any sales meeting, and I didn't tell everybody else what they were doing wrong, right? That came later. But I would tell myself what I was doing wrong. What can I do to get better? I didn't kill this. I didn't do this. We should have done this last week. We should have invested here. Because that's how you learn. You learn from your mistakes. So you got to make sure each part of your organization is ready to take that next step. It means they have the right people, you got the right strategy, and so on. The other thing that I think is really, really critical and often ignored, and most often overlooked by companies, is I believe that most organizations, not every, most organizations have a chance to step on the gas. What I mean by that, there's a point in time when the product's right, the market's right, competition is where it is at, the economy maybe is supportive, maybe there's legal issues that are supportive or regulatory, whatever it is. There's some combination of events that make it the right time to accelerate. And unfortunately, if you don't take advantage of that, sometimes it comes back around, but usually it doesn't. And it's kind of hard to see it, but you got to figure out when is the right time to do that. When's the right time to go get that capital? What are you going to do with it? And if you step too early, you burn through capital really, really fast. If you step too late, you're probably already beaten, and you might survive, you might do okay, but it gets a whole lot harder. So being able to identify that right moment to step on the gas, having the scalability capabilities, having a good enough product to sell, having the market right. You know, it's not only about how good your product is, it's about when consumers are ready to buy it. And those consumers could be businesses or individuals. You know, most technology that we all take for granted existed years and years and years before it becomes popular, right? I remember when I hired in an NBD bank in January of 1984, and my first day I sat down with my boss's boss, and he said, you know, we just read a study that said checks will be gone. There will be no checks being used by the year 2000. In the year 2000, there were still more checks being used every year than the prior year. Right, the technology was all there, but consumers weren't ready for it yet. And there's story and story and story after that. Next. And then I think this is the last one of this, is about going to market. Again, we think that that's the biggest challenge, and mostly because once in a while you'll find a sales guy that started a company. But usually it's a guy that is more about building a product, building a technology, right? They're able to build something and then we're going to go sell it, especially in the B2B world and the tech world. And so in most cases, they are usually the worst people to be thinking about that go-to-market strategy. And the other thing is that when you're thinking about that, is you got to find the right solution for the problem you have or the opportunity or the challenge you have. And there's a whole lot of techniques and ways to market your company and sell your products and services, but it's not the same toolkit or the same map that's going to work for everybody. And so a lot about getting that go-to-market is to figure out what kind of company you are, what's the right way to go to market, and that's a huge, huge challenge. Next. And that's it. So, any questions? Rich?
Larry, what does a profile of one of your customers look like in exchange? How would you describe it?
So the perfect profile is a company that has money, so they've raised some money, they have a product, and they have some revenue, and now they're figuring out how to accelerate. I will tell you in all honesty, we have found that companies a little earlier stage have all the same challenges, and so actually in some cases we're helping them prepare to raise that money, and then we come back in with the step-in services afterwards. So, but those are the right kind of companies. Companies that have a product, have revenue, and either are in that, thinking about getting ready to raise money, and or have already raised it and are ready to start to accelerate, or are producing enough cash flow that they can accelerate their growth without necessarily even raising money. But in most cases, they're having to go get more money.
Do you have to get along with the VCs when you're stepping in after a VC round?
Yeah, it's you know, this is, when I was at ForeSee, man, I would go out and I'd hard sell our product, right? I have not made a sales call in this endeavor, and which is, you know, I can't go to someone and say, hey, you know, you're really not good at this, you're the CEO. So people have to raise their hand and kind of reach out to us. So we're getting people talking to us every week, every couple of weeks. New people are getting introduced. Some are being introduced by VCs, but then the CEO also has to realize that I need help, right? So that's sort of the biggest challenge as second stage is how you find that business. But through word of mouth, through, you know, our network, we're getting a lot of opportunities. We're actually at that point where it's like, we got to wait a few weeks to talk to this guy, you know? And so it's a good problem. And I think the most personally satisfying part of it for me is that, you know, in most cases I'm the guy going out and doing that first meeting and giving a lot of advice, right? Because that's what you do. And someone asks you a question, you give an answer. Well, I think about this, I think about that. And it's actually the most fun part of the job, to be honest.
Sounds like you're at the second stage.
Totally. I need to hire some salesmen.
Larry, we're going to wrap up. We would love to hear from more questions, but I know you could stay around a little while, and so if people have questions they can ask, because I know people are kind of on a hard clock, many of you around 9 o'clock. So I want to give Larry a great hand for doing this. I know there's some very powerful takeaways for me. I think one of the biggest ones is the whole idea is the customer experience and not just customer satisfaction. So Rachel and I have been making lots of ideas about how to make leaders connect and Pasick consultation a better business. We'll be working on that between now and next week, I think. But you'll be available to sign.
Yes.
So I think what we're going to do is have you sign over at that table where Pam and Dave are sitting, and Hillary will bring books over. What's the price on it, Hillary? $26, and you take credit cards or There's no checks anymore, though, right? No, I'm kidding. You can give checks. If anybody have checks with them, they can still bring it, even though it's supposed to be dead for 30 years now. So Larry's been doing a great job, and I think that you know, Skip can, and many of you in the room who have supported these businesses, it's really very gratifying to see startups succeed, and not only succeed, but with this book to add to our knowledge base and help everybody else succeed. So that's really great, and I'm sure people are taking down notes like crazy here. So, and if you need any money to start your business, Charlie, you got some cash there to loan at Bank of Ann Arbor, and if you really want to go big time, you can see Dave Gorka and get some venture capital, right? And if you want to go small time, you can just sell candy bars on the corner, whatever. But we'll go there, and I want to say next time, December 2nd, which isn't that far away, Len Middleton, who's been here before, is a fantastic speaker, an entrepreneur, a professor at the business school, is going to talk about a very big deal, an innovation, an institute for medical innovation, where he's going to be helping companies who are doing innovation in the medical sector get started and grow. And he's going to be kind of launching that program here and telling us about it. And then in January we have Liz Ross and Molly McFarland. Liz is one of the big deals in advertising, especially online advertising. She's the Chief Marketing Officer. I can't remember the name of the company, but it's one of the big 5 in the United States. And she's going to be presenting on the future of media and media advertising. And then in February, Professor Elliot Soloway, who's one of the greatest speakers in the world, is going to be talking about his new product, which is taking your websites and making them collaborative. So how can you talk to the people who are looking at your products, while they're looking at the products, they're seeing the same thing that you're seeing. So it's a really interesting program. We got many other great speakers coming up. I'm also having a preview for a roundtable that I do. Several of you have been part of that in the past, Steve, and several of you in the room, Diane, where I bring leaders together and we just kind of share ideas and visions and work on execution and all those good things that Larry's been talking about. And what's the date for the preview, Rachel? It's the 9th or something like that? Right. December 9th, and that's at my new office out at Avis Farm. So please come. There's no cost to that, but you can hear about the program. And I'll be launching at least one new group in January. So thank you very much for coming. Please hang out. Take food with you. This food is provided by our sponsors, and take them back. And Larry, be over here to sign books and answer questions. So please feel free, hang out, and give these kids some jobs. Keep them here, right?
Hey, hi Roger.